Welcome to the April edition of the PED Lunch and Learn, featuring a presentation of the Municipal Class Environmental Assessment process, brought to you by the Environmental Assessment Working Group, which represents both PED and PW. Our presenters are current co-chairs Megan Salvucci, Project Manager of Infrastructure Renewal and PED, or PW, and PW. Melanie Anderton, Project Manager, Growth Management, PED. Also presenting are Omar Shams, PM, Transportation Planning, PED, Mike Christie, PM, Hamilton Water, PW, and Margaret Fazio, SPM, Growth Management, PED, and past co-chair of this working group. Our presenters would also like to acknowledge a former co-chair, Sharon McPherson Namath, Hamilton Water, PW, as well as a current member and content contributor for this presentation, Dipankar Sharma, SPM, Infrastructure Renewal, PW. As usual, if you have any questions during the presentation, please post them in the chat and we'll address them at the end. So let's get right to it. Megan?
And one other note before we start is that we use a lot of acronyms when we're talking. So for your convenience, we're going to post a list of the acronyms and their definitions in the chat. So with that being said, so as Gord quickly touched on, that the presenters today are members of the Environmental Assessment Working Group, or the EA Working Group. So you gave a brief overview, but a little bit more context is that EA Working Group members share information with each other and coordinate corporate resources and procedures for the conduct of EA projects for the city's capital infrastructure. We help each other with the interpretation of the EA guide, and public engagement methodologies. And for everyone's information, all members are great resources if you ever have any questions about EA processes or projects within the city. So through our presentation today, we're hoping to give you an EA 101 overview. So we'll go over the why, what, how, when, who, and where of city-led environmental assessments. We'll go over a few examples of future and completed environmental assessments. We'll go over the EA reform that is currently ongoing. And then we've left time at the end for any questions or comments. So we wanted to start off with a quick introduction poll to see where everyone's general knowledge of EAs falls. So if everyone could use the reaction button in WebEx to vote yes, use your thumbs up; to vote no, thumbs down. And if you could just press it a few times because the reactions go by really quickly, so we can kind of gauge what everyone's reactions are, that'd be wonderful. So the first question is, have you ever been involved in an EA process as part of the city, or as part of work? So this could be reviewing reports, providing data, or commenting on alternatives being assessed.
So Megan, I'm seeing about an even split between thumbs up and thumbs down from different folks. Some are, I guess, some have done it more than once, so this is great. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Next question. Sorry. Have you ever commented on an EA as a resident? So this could either be within the city of Hamilton or another municipality or even a provincial or federal EA.
The construction? Yeah, and the weather has changed, right? So they're out more. But also, like, because it's.
So I see that most folks would say, that I see, Megan, is thumbs down. So no, most of us have not commented as a resident.
Perfect. And then the last question is, have you ever lost property as a result of an EA project?
So I'm seeing mostly no's. Most of us have not felt the pain of property loss as a result of an EA project.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for participating, and we'll have one more poll later on in the presentation. So before diving into the what, we wanted to start off with the why. So through our work, we follow the Municipal Class Environmental Assessment process, which is governed by the Ontario Environmental Assessment Act. The purpose of the Ontario Environmental Assessment Act is to provide for the betterment of the people of the whole or any part of Ontario by providing for the protection, conservation, and wise management of Ontario's environment. Environment is applied in a broad sense and includes the natural, social, cultural, built, and economic environments. The Environmental Assessment Act sets out planning and decision-making process used to promote environmentally responsible decision-making. Under this act, a number of streamlined processes are identified, which we'll go over in the next slide. On the topic of provincial acts, some of the work we do also aligns with projects covered by the Planning Act. So there's a process identified through the legislation we follow that allows for two separate processes to be combined with the intent to eliminate duplicated requirements. And this is called the integrated process. So an example of a project that follows the integrated process is the AEGDs, or the Airport Employment Growth Districts, Garth Street extension between 20 Road and Dickinson Road. This is being led by the developer and landowner of surrounding lands. So under the Planning Act, they're required to fill, or they have requirements as part of the application process. And then under the Environmental Assessment Act, or Municipal Class EA process, there's also requirements set for the road portion of the work. And so through this project, the public engagement requirements for the EA Act as well as the Planning Act are combined in order to gain efficiency for the proponent. However, the appeal process in an integrated scenario is not to the MECP as it is with other EA projects, but to the Ontario Land Tribunal, which is sent together with the planning application. So a pro to this is that again, you save time on certain elements like public engagement. A con is if the application is held up at the Ontario Land Tribunal, the EA is also held up even if the EA itself is not being appealed. So overall, the city's experience with this has been rather on the con side. If a secondary plan includes integrated EA projects, so for example, roads within the area, the roads could potentially be implemented prior to the development, even if the development is held up at the Ontario Land Tribunal. In the past, this has bound our hands moving forward with city works, such as pumping stations and road-specific EAs. Therefore, the city as a proponent has separated the processes from each other, meaning that we've run them in parallel and coordinated them, but haven't officially followed the integrated process. So this on the screen is an overview of the different types of EAs. So the type we do is just one of many. On the screen is a summarized hierarchy to show how our studies are categorized. So we do projects under the Municipal Class EA process, or MCEA process, for Class EAs under the streamlined category for the Provincial Environmental Assessment Act. The Municipal Class EA process covers both roads and water and wastewater projects. To use this process, we follow the Municipal Engineer Association's guide, which helps interpret the legislation. One other thing to point out on the diagram is the difference between the individual process and the streamlined process, which falls within the second row on screen. Streamlined is for groups of projects that have similar alternatives and the process is simplified. The individual process is intended for unique projects that have significant impacts, and the process is significantly longer, costlier, and more complicated than the streamlined route. An example of a project that would follow the individual process was the initial EA completed for the Redhill Valley Parkway. As mentioned previously, the EAs consider the environment in a broad sense, which includes not just the natural environment, but also the social and economic environments. They look to minimize or avoid environmental impacts by evaluating alternatives to or alternative means of carrying out a project. In order to conduct this assessment and ensure that the environment is looked at in an all-inclusive way, there are a number of different inputs that are factored into projects. These are shown on the screen with a more thorough breakdown under each of the headings as to show what each section entails. So there's a lot of information on the screen, so please feel free to read it more thoroughly when a copy of the presentation slides are sent out. But overall, this screen highlights the complexities of what we look at during our projects. And now I'm going to pass it over to Margaret.
Thanks, Megan. So this graphic shows you that the municipal Class EA process consists of 5 phases. And so in general, the process is to identify a problem, look at alternative solutions, look at alternative ways to implement the solution, identify impacts and mitigation measures, and select the preferred solution. The consulting of interested parties has to be carried out throughout the process. The consultation has to be done. In addition to the phases, road, water, and wastewater projects are organized into different project schedules, and they are referred to as A+, B, and C. In the graphic, you can see that each of the different schedules addresses a different range of the 5 phases. So the level of detail in an EA depends on the complexity or degree of anticipated impacts. So the more complex the project, the higher the schedule, and the more phases it has to cover. So Schedule A is considered pre-approved, so basically no EA has to be done for it. Schedule A prime is similar, except that notification to the public has to be carried out before construction. Schedule B has to complete phases 1 and 2, and Schedule C has to complete phases 1 to 4. The schedule to be followed ultimately guides the degree of consultation and level of detail required for each project. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the how continues in the application of schedules, and we just prepared different examples of the projects that fall within each schedule. So again, there is a gradient where Schedule A project have the least impact and the processes followed is the least intensive, and Schedule C is the projects with the greatest impacts and the process followed is the most intensive. So for road examples, Schedule A is known as, in the EA lingo as pre-approved, as I said. Example is snow plowing. It's a standard practice with low impact and clear alternatives. Schedule A plus is a two-way conversion of one-way street, and so it requires property owner notification prior to change. Schedule B is high mast lighting. Schedule C example is new roads or road reconstruction that is over a certain dollar value, and usually when it's widened too, not when it touches new ground. Both schedules B and C follow variations of the more intensive EA process involving public consultation and additional studies, and the projects above, of course, are generalizations. Some can fall under multiple schedules, and the deciding factors could be anywhere within any of the categories that Megan mentioned before. So it could be implementation, it could be impact on developability of surrounding lands, it could be cost, it could be a wide variety of different things that drive the choice of the preferred alternative. Thanks, Megan. So the question of when, so basically we're talking about the drivers of when do we do EAs, when do we have to do them, and what are the reasons that we do them when we do them. So one of the reasons for it is when the new provincial policy statement comes out, and then our UHOP may be adjusted, and studies are done as part of that adjustment, and master plans are some of those studies. In the master plans, we'd identify different projects, which would then trigger an EA requirement. Other drivers include development. So we would consult with our economic development cousins in our department, and they work closely with industry. So, for example, in Aegd, we would be sort of advertising that, oh, by the way, lands by the airport are now available, and we would then look at what is the interest in having, say, new roads developed and new pumping station needs, etc. So definitely economic development and development desires in a certain area are a strong driver for when we do EAs on our end. The other thing to consider is the life cycle of existing infrastructure. So if we have roads that already need reconstructing, maybe we also have identified that they need widening, we may do an EA to combine both reconstruction and widening in the same at the same construction phase. And one other thing is in the capital budget, we look at 5 years ahead of what we will need. And we have to consider the fact that an EA expiry date is 10 years from the date that it's filed with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, or the day on which the appeal to an EA has been finalized, to the day that the shovel hits the ground. And so just to give you an idea of timelines, we often get the question of why do the EAs take so long? And they do take a long time because, as you can see, there are a lot of technical components to each EA. And so they may take up 1 to 3 years, sometimes longer, depending on what, what the scope creep may be for particular projects. They are then followed by detailed design with done in-house. That's usually a 3-year cycle, a 3-year length, and then construction, of course. So depending on when all that is scheduled, 10 years doesn't seem like such a long time. The next is the who. So who does them in our corporation? So of course we are a municipality, municipal class EA document. That's a very self-explanatory thing, but what people sort of don't remember, or maybe some are not aware, is that private developers also are obligated to follow the same document, or they can choose to do it if they want to do the easier route rather than having an independent EA. Totally unnecessary kind of work. So the main City of Hamilton staff, the main divisions that carry out EAs the most often are in Planning and Economic Development Department. So Melanie and I are in Growth Management, and Omar is in Transportation Planning and Parking Division. Of course, there's other staff in that division as well that do it. That do them. In Public Works, we have Hamilton Water and infrastructure renewal sections that carry out other infrastructure projects as well. We should note that sometimes in the facilities, they may have an EA that is carried out. We've had that happen on occasion. And also transit has its own process that's an expedited process called TPAP, Transit Project Assessment Process. It's sort of independent and we don't often overlap with them, but we're just aware that, it's sort of a similar process to ours. Of course, besides the technical components, the huge an important aspect of the EA process is who are the people that that we're impacting by our projects. So internally, as some of you have raised your thumbs up, you would recognize that you would have been engaged in our teams or voluntold to be part of our EA project teams, for which we're really grateful. We need your expertise and we really appreciate it. And the second, of course, is the public. So depending on the scope of the project, it could be from, just the landowners surrounding a particular area or multiple areas throughout the city or the entire city for a, citywide master plan. Stakeholders may include agencies, so provincial agencies such as Ministry of Transportation or MNRF, Ministry of, so all kinds of ministries that depending on the project scope may be triggered by this. So the last but not least are Indigenous Nations. So that's, as you know, with the reconciliation process that's been that's been taking place countrywide, we've also adopted that into our processes. We've previously been engaging with them, but that process has ramped up with help of Shelley Hill, and we now regularly engage with Indigenous Nations on an annual basis and throughout the corporation. But specifically for EAs, it's important because it's only the EAs can only now be appealed on the basis of Indigenous rights and treaties, and they're referred to as Section 16 of the EA Act, and that's formally known as Part 2 order. And now for something completely different again, if we can have a poll. So we're going to test if you've been paying attention. So the first question is, and again, thumbs up for A, thumbs down for B answer. How many divisions are leading EAs in the city? So please start your thumbs going. I know it's a trick question. I see up, thumbs down, thumbs up. So some thumbs up, some down, mostly up. So yeah, there are mainly 4 divisions that carry out EAs, but I know it's a trick question because there could be others that could be the facilities folks that may also sometimes do. So sorry, this was a trick question just to see if you're paying attention. The next question is, what class of EAs does the city usually lead for capital project implementation? And the answers could be municipal or integrated. Someone has raised a hand, but we cannot answer questions now. So just put your thumbs up for whichever you think is the answer. Okay, I think everyone's been looking, has been paying attention, and yes, the correct answer is A. We prefer to do the municipal class EA process. Integrated is a whole other aspect of it. So the last question is, why do we need to do EAs? Do we do it just to keep people entertained and keep ourselves employed, or do we need to follow the EA Act? Thumbs down, unfortunately, for the for the correct answer. I see people got the joke too. That's great. Okay, so we're keeping you entertained with those questions. I'm really glad. But yeah, the correct answer is B. We need to follow the EA Act. Thank you. And now I pass you to Melanie.
Thanks, Margaret. Okay, so next we're going to provide some of examples of several ongoing, future, and completed EAs throughout the city, including transportation and some water projects. Okay. I'm going to start off with the ongoing projects within the Airport Employment Growth District, or the Aegd. So this map represents ongoing and future EA studies. However, I will focus on the current projects as the future projects will be discussed later on. First, we have the Aegd Tnp update. The study area is shown on the map in gray. The Aegd Tnp update was initiated to review the collector and arterial road network relative to recent trends in the size and form of approved land uses, to address potential barriers that preclude road network connections and mitigate deficiencies throughout the network modifications, and to ensure that the road network meets the existing and future multimodal transportation needs and stormwater LID requirements. Throughout the study, the scope grew and new issues were identified. Roads were moved, network improved, and agencies provided comments. The majority of the study is complete, with the Cultural Heritage Inventory and HSR Collector 6N feasibility study still required. Next is the Dickinson Road, Phase 3 and 4 EA, between Lancaster Road and Upper James Street, which is shown as number 11 on the map. The original Aegd Tmp satisfied phases 1 and 2 of the EA process and identified Dickinson Road between Upper James Street and Lancaster Road as needing to be widened to 4 lanes. Some of the challenges include impact on an active cemetery and the airport lands themselves. Next, we have the Lancaster Road EA between Dickinson Road and Gardner Road, shown in purple or number 7 on the map. The need to widen Lancaster Road has been confirmed from the original Aegd Tnp and the update. Challenges include protection of forest and Hydro 1 corridor on the west side of the roadway, and recently built residential developments on the east side. And finally, the Gar Street extension, which is number 9 on the map, is being led by the developer and is being integrated with the planning application process. Now, there are several ongoing EAs within the Fruitland-Winona Secondary Plan area. First up, we have the Barton and 50 Road Improvements EA, shown in yellow, and the CN Rail Crossing, shown as number 20 on the map. The CN Rail Crossing has been deemed to be needed sometime in the future, but we were careful about what would trigger its need and that further detailed studies would be required. Fruitland-Winona Secondary Plan directed the widening of Barton Street to 40 meters right-of-way, i.e. 36 meters evenly and 4 meters offset to the south, to accommodate for a promenade. The current right-of-way widths west to east are varied and all transportation modes are to be accommodated. Next up is the Highway 8 EA, shown in purple on the map, from DeWitt Road to 50 Road, which will address transportation and drainage needs throughout the corridor. Through this EA, we are accommodating interregional traffic, Highway 8 as a truck route, and supporting new growth in the Scooby lands. Maintaining and protecting the rural character to the south and its historical significance, while accommodating pockets of the Greenbelt, farmland, and long-established operating farms, makes this a unique and interesting project. And last is the Block 1 servicing strategy, shown as 15A, and the Gordon Dean Ave EA, shown as number 16 on the map. These are being facilitated by growth management and carried out by developers in collaboration with other staff. Now we have the 20 Road East and Upper Redhill Valley Parkway road extensions, and they're required to establish a road network to service planned growth, including the Redhill Business Park area. These extensions will provide a direct link between the Redhill Valley Business Park and major arteries such as Rymal Road and the Redhill Valley Parkway. The Class EA will have consideration for goods movements and all modes of transportation. 20 Road East is intended to be extended easterly from its existing terminus at Glover Road, and Upper Redhill Valley Parkway is intended to be extended southerly from its existing terminus at Rymal Road. These two road extensions will connect at a new intersection. These road extensions are necessary to meet the transportation needs in the area and to support the ongoing and future development within the business park. I'm going to pass it off back to Megan.
Perfect. Thanks, Melanie. So the next few slides will go over a few of the projects that the infrastructure renewal section is currently working on. So the first two are Gardner Road from Wilson Street to the Highway 403 off-ramp and Rymal Road from Upper James Street to Dartnell Road. Both projects are following the Schedule C process to look at transportation and drainage improvements. And transportation includes all modes of transportation, so pedestrians, cyclists, transit users, goods movement, and personal vehicle users. Both projects were initiated in late 2020, and we anticipate that they'll both wrap up in early 2023. I want to use these projects to highlight some of the complexities we face while doing EAs. So while they are two separate projects, both Gardner and Rymal fall along the same corridor and therefore experience some of the same challenges. So in an earlier slide, and I think Melanie touched upon it a bit, is that there's a lot of inputs that go into EAs, so the social environment, the cultural environment, the natural environment, etc. And all of these come with their own set of challenges. However, I wanted to focus on the complexities tied to interpreting planning documents and recommendations. So the image on the screen shows many of the relevant planning studies. So they all contain recommendations specifically for our study areas or for neighboring road segments that need to be taken into consideration. So these studies don't include citywide plans that also need to be considered, such as the Citywide Transportation Master Plan, the Cycling Master Plan, the Truck Routes Master Plan, and others, or policies such as the city's official plans. If we consider the Gardner-Rymal corridor as being from Wilson Street to Upper Centennial Parkway, that's just over 20 kilometers. And the ongoing studies, so Gardner Road and Rymal Road, cover approximately 10 kilometers of that stretch and are impacted by the 8 studies shown on screen. An added layer is that these projects also fall within the S-Line corridor of the BLAST network, which is Hamilton's plan for rapid transit. The S-Line covers approximately 30 kilometers, so the area highlighted on screen, as well as the rest of Upper Centennial and Centennial Parkway. So through the ongoing EAs, the goal will be to not only take all of these different recommendations into consideration, but also contribute to forming a cohesive corridor that supports the community for years to come. So while this is typical of all EAs, the Gardner and Rymal projects are unique in both the quantity of planning inputs and also the need to consider areas far beyond the extent of the ongoing EA project areas in order to create that cohesive result. Infrastructure Renewal is also completing a Schedule C project along Upper Wellington from Limeridge Road to Stonechurch Road. The study is shown in the image on the right. This project highlights the importance of revisiting recommendations due to context changes and why the planning process is a reiterative cycle. The picture on the left is an aerial image from 1999. Improvements to Upper Wellington were initially recommended under the South Mountain Area Transportation Master Plan, which was completed in the year 2000. So the image on the left is what would have been the context for the plan at the time. Under this plan, it was recommended that Upper Wellington be widened from 2 lanes to 5 lanes. The picture in the middle is an aerial image from 2019. So this is the current context that is being used for the ongoing study. There are clear differences between the two pictures, particularly in terms of the development that has occurred. And this highlights why recommendations in 2000 aren't necessarily the best recommendations for today. And so through our assessment process, we're actually now looking at a 3-lane cross-section instead of the initially recommended 5 lanes. So this will also apply to the bridge over top of the link, where we will likely be recommending a road diet. So the existing 4 lanes will be converted to 3 lanes with improved active transportation facilities. And then just as a final note, this project is still ongoing, and so these recommendations have not yet been approved by council, but this is the current direction for the project. And now I'm going to pass it over to Mike.
Great, thanks, Megan. So for those who may not be aware, Hamilton Water owns and operates 4 municipal drinking water systems in our 4 rural settlement areas in Carlisle, Freelton, Greensville, and Linden. And in Carlisle, we have 4 municipal wells and an elevated water tower to support their water needs. And over the last 20 years or so, Carlisle has shown a very high per capita water demand compared to typical, engineering design standards and what the actual drinking water system was designed for. And this is almost entirely occurring during the peak summer months where, lawn and garden watering and irrigation can account for a major proportion of this overall demand. And this has actually resulted in an existing Carlisle residents not being able to connect to municipal water because of that excess use. And it does put the community at some level of increased risk as it relates to fire protection if, let's say, there are multiple fires occurring during periods of peak summer demand. So this problem has been going on for a while. We originally started an EA back in 2013, 2014 to try and resolve these water capacity and storage issues, where initially a new well and a second water tower were proposed. But due to a large amount of public feedback and some NIMBY issues surrounding a second water tower, the EA was put on hold and kind of transferred into a long-term water conservation program to see if, the community could reduce their overall demand to solve these water storage issues. And Hamilton Water organized about a 5 or 6 year water conservation program, quite a comprehensive one. And it was found that, even with very strict conservation measures and incentives, that that conservation wouldn't solve Carlisle's water issues. So that's why we're back at the drawing board now to try and resolve this issue so that, obviously everyone in Carlisle can connect to municipal water and that the design of the drinking water system is sustainable long term. So some high level considerations that'll be important throughout the project that we're currently kind of asking ourselves. Given the historic interest in the project, public engagement and communication will be a major priority for us. And this is, a tight-knit, well-educated community that wants to preserve an idyllic kind of rural estate type neighborhood. So as part of the project, we've hired a facilitator to help guide us through the public information centers and as well as a community liaison committee. And we've also noticed in Hamilton Water, whether it be Waterdown or Lancaster or Carlisle, that there's increased public opposition to water towers in general. And the unfortunate thing is that water towers are typically the most operationally beneficial and cost effective to try and operate and maintain compared to, alternatives. And, when we're considering the impacts holistically, looking at the triple bottom line, social, financial, environmental, how should these impacts be kind of compiled and considered to arrive at kind of the best overall solution for all the stakeholders? And obviously that's what the EA process is all about. So collectively, the final product of this EA will be a conceptual design and a cost estimate for infrastructure that will meet Carlisle's needs for water. We're not there yet, but in my mind, this sort of project kind of focuses on what the role of municipal infrastructure should actually be. Should it be, simply a utilitarian means to an end, to meet our mandated compliance-based kind of design requirements? Or is there room or budget or appetite to make this infrastructure more value added, useful, or even something the community could be proud of? So we're grappling with all of that as we initiate this EA, which is ongoing now. And with that, I'll pass it off to Omar.
Thank you, Mike. So the Truck Route Master Plan is a citywide initiative fulfilling phases 1 and 2 of the EA process. The project was led by the Transportation Planning, however, with the great level of involvement and input received from the all other sections based on their areas of expertise. The objectives of this study was to review the City of Hamilton's existing truck route network and identify the current and projected truck route related problems, develop, evaluate, and recommend practical solutions, and recommend supporting policies and tools that the city can consider to mitigate the current problems and the potential future challenges that may evolve as the land uses change and the new technologies emerge. Due to the large spectrum of the interest in this rather complex and controversial and sensitive project, 2 phases of public engagement and stakeholder consultation were held. And as part of these engagement efforts, in order to notify members of the public and stakeholder groups, we issued nearly 230,000 notices by mail dropping them into the community mailboxes in order to keep people involved and informed of the process. And in order to have a truly transparent engagement process, we established an advisory group, including representatives from the environmental advocacy groups, goods movement industry, public health, equity-seeking groups, agriculture and cycling communities, and also 6 members of the public representing the urban, suburban, and the rural communities. Given that this was a heavily in technical analysis and required some in-depth analysis, we also used big data and GIS cutting-edge technologies to evaluate alternative networks and also recommend a network that meets the needs of the community and the businesses. In addition to that, the objective was to also develop precision public policies in order to help the city to achieve the long-term goal and also align our goals to achieve the city's strategic vision to be the best place to raise a child and age successfully. Some key issues and influences that informed the outcomes of this study were rural areas specific issues, environmental and climate changes. The city declared climate emergency in 2019, some public health and safety concerns, network connectivity in terms of ensuring that our network is connected with the adjacent municipalities and the provincial systems, some social equity concerns, emerging technologies and policies, enforcement, development and employment areas, and some local area and hotspots. As part of this process, we also identified a number of future links that could be designated as a truck route upon necessary infrastructure improvements are implemented. And with that, I'll pass it to Margaret.
Thanks, Omar. So, Omar, this is a really great segue into completed and future studies because your truck route didn't necessarily immediately and obviously trigger EA projects. However, there's always a possibility that it might, right, as a master plan. So what you see before you are some completed projects, 2 of which blocks a servicing strategy. So block 2 and block 3 identified as 15B and 15C on the screen. Were servicing strategies that are sort of a new process. They fall between, it's okay, Ashra, they fall between the secondary plan and the master planning process and before development applications can be submitted. So they are not appealable outright. However, they are completed when council approves them, and development applications have to adhere to the direction given by the servicing strategy. So they've both been completed. The one, block 2 at 15B was carried out by us, the city leading the process. 15C was carried out by developers, and the future study in this area is number 18. That's an addendum to Arvin Avenue EA. That's a Schedule C project because we have to realign it from where it was originally intended to go between McNeely and Lewis. Next slide, please. The next area of future projects falls again within the airport lands, Airport Employment Growth District, or as we lovingly call it, Aegd lands. Once the transportation master plan is updated, we will consider potential updates to the water wastewater master plan. And that's a phase 2 and 1 and 2. So Schedule B component of the projects will be completed. Also, we have ongoing / future, not officially started, but definitely work has internally started going on the Book Road corridor. So you'll see the yellow mustard number 8 corridor outlined with some with interrupted lines, some solid lines. That's a Book Road corridor. A very important corridor for goods movement, continuation of Dickinson Road to connect the through route to Highway 6. Also, Smith Road corridor, that's made up of South Code, Smith, and Collector 2W. 2W is the interrupted line. That's a potential, that's a future road, doesn't exist today. And Smith and South Code would be widened. So again, that's starting not long from now, this year. Gardner Road between Highway 6 and where it's retouching Rymall has already had an EA completed of phase 3 and 4. It's a Schedule C EA. However, there's a need for an addendum that will include underground infrastructure in order for the document to be complete. Next slide, please. So the EA reform has been ongoing. So we've been operating under the previously released document from 2018. However, in 2019, the current provincial government has initiated an EA reform process, and the intent was to combine all the different classes of EAs into one regulation and to streamline the EA process. The main lobby group, the main sort of body that interacts with the governing ministry for this process is the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. So the main body that interacts with them is the Municipal Engineers Association. It's done voluntarily by that association, and it does an annual audit of how successful or how effective the EA process is, and therefore it also talks to the MECP about potential changes to the guidance document, and it authors and publishes the Municipal Class EA companion guides. So we have been very involved as a corporation in this EA reform process. We're active on the EA reform committee, and together with Sharon McPherson-Namath, I participate on regular reviews and meetings and feedback, and I know I've looped some of you into some of those discussions, so pardon my emails, but it's been a very intensive couple of years for that process. And also there's a newly formed Indigenous Engagement Subcommittee of that committee that Shelley Hill and I have been participating in, where we're obviously discussing Indigenous engagement in the EA realm of work. Just to give you an update on the whole process, we've been going at this for a couple of years now, and the last proposed changes have kind of indicated that MECP has done a 180-degree turn from its intention or intended changes to the EA process. So those changes have now been formally rejected by the MEA, and I believe Ontario Good Roads Association has also joined us in rejecting, and we're continuing to work with MECP on this process. And I pass you back to Omar.
Thank you, Margaret. So in summary and some key takeaways from this session, interesting session actually. Number one is that EAs are important. It's not just to keep us employed and keep people entertained, but they are important because we do the EAs for the betterment of the people of Ontario and providing and the protection and conservation of and wise management of the Ontario's environment in general. Number two, that the city is following the streamlined EA approach for all the road and the water projects. Number three, that there are 5 phases for the EA, and each of the different types of the project has to follow certain of those phases, from problem identification to development of alternative, to evaluation of alternative, filing the project file reports, and lastly the implementation. More importantly, that there are 4 sections mainly conducting and completing the EAs, but there are other sections across the corporation that require to complete EAs for certain projects like facilities and transit projects. And lastly, and more importantly, that the province of Ontario is modernizing their environmental assessment process to streamline the process and assist with the fast tracking of some of the most controversial project just by introducing some improvements there. Next slide, please. For anyone who is interested to learn more about the EA project, we have the hamilton.ca. There's a web page that you can review all the completed projects, and also for the most recent projects that are active for public engagement and feedback, you can visit the engagehamilton.ca page. And also the presentation will be provided to everyone, so you can use the link provided on this slide. And with that, I would like to thank everyone and open the floor for Q&As. And also, Melanie, would you mind posting that link on the chat as well? Thank you. I think that goes back to Gord.
I do see that posted there already, so that's great. So we do have a question. Before I get to it, the one thing I did want to mention, Omar went through the truck route master plan, and so we are planning on tentatively doing in September a full lunch and learn on the truck route master plan. So for people that want to see that more in depth, just keep an eye open for that. But like I said, we do have a question. So from George, are EA still appealable? Example to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Also, how does the Environmental Assessment Act play, if at all, into its federal counterpart, the Impact Assessment Act?
Did you want me to take a crack at this, guys? Yeah. So the EAs are only appealable if they are officially integrated, formally, I guess, integrated into a Planning Act application process, George. If they are carried out outside of that process, then they are appealable only through the ministry, the governing municipality and body to which you would appeal an EA normally outside of the Planning Act process is the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. So, and the appeals are only on the basis of process, and the process, it has to do with Indigenous rights and treaties. And how does the EA play into the federal counterpart of Impact Assessment Act? We don't necessarily, we may overlap, but it's not something that, so I should first track back. The way that the Impact or Environmental Assessment Act works is we are governed under the Provincial Environmental Assessment Act. If we were to span, say, into another province with an EA project, then that would trigger a federal level of EA. So I would imagine that the Impact Assessment Act would be a similar trigger, that you have to be high enough or spanning more than one province to go into that process. And environmental assessments go into contaminated sites or impact assessment content. So for example, when we are looking at a project, we will look to see if there is past history on a certain project and may have to go through geotech studies to test soil quality, water quality, to see, a potential level of contamination of a particular land. So that is sort of incorporated into it. It's not an official impact assessment that is conducted. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what we incorporate into the EAs. They're meant to be very comprehensive and all-inclusive.
Great. It looks like George is saying that you answered the question fully, so that's great. I don't see any more questions. I think you guys did such a good job that you've answered all their questions ahead of time. Actually, George has got one more thing here. So he's asking Margaret, speaking of the Indigenous component, where does cultural heritage, example, archaeological assessments come in? Presume at the beginning.
It's addressed to me, but anyone can answer. So if anyone would like to speak to it, please go ahead. I don't want to be hogging the mic. They want me to hog it. Okay.
It's all yours.
Okay, so archaeological assessments come in with Indigenous people. So there's more than archaeological assessment that interests Indigenous nations. When we've met with all 5 of the ones that we are, obligated to talk to, they've expressed interest in archaeology as well as natural heritage. So first of all, they like to review our stage 1 reports or any stage reports. We do have a policy that compensates for their time for that. We may have formal agreements with them, so there's a process set up where we would do that. For stage 2 or any other field work, so either in natural heritage or archaeology field work, many nations, actually all of them, have expressed interest in joining our consultants in the field to field monitor that work. And we also have, a policy for the archaeological, for the compensation for their time in the archaeology component. But the EA working group, together with Cynthia Graham and Shelley Hill and others, and actually a lot of cultural heritage planners are involved in this, as well as natural heritage planners. So we should acknowledge that PED has a broader involvement in this beyond the EA working group. So we are working actively currently on the natural heritage policy to compensate Indigenous people for their work in that realm of EAs. And it goes beyond EAs as well. If landscape architectural services have a study or, well, are required to do archaeology and natural heritage inventory before they create a new park or they reconstruct a park, they also are engaging Indigenous people on that basis in order to make it a complete sort of public engagement process on their end, even though it's not an EA related component. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it looks like it. That's great, Margaret. Thank you. So yeah, I think we've made good time. Appreciate that. So in closing, I'd like to thank all of our presenters. I'd like to thank Marie Auk for looking after things behind the scenes, and also the entire Employee Engagement Committee. And of course, a big thank you to all of you for sharing your lunch hour with us. So watch your inbox for details of the next Lunch and Learn, as well as links to today's presentation video and slides. So with that, I will bid everyone a great afternoon. Hopefully the sun comes out. So great. Have a great day.
Sorry, someone has raised their hand, I think.
Uh,
They have a question.
do
I'm
we
trying
have
to
someone?
see.
If someone has a question, they can just, if they want to